In this video, we're going to be finding and estimating square roots. A square root is a number a, or the number a is a square root of b if a squared equals b. So we're looking for two numbers multiplied, the same number multiplied together to get b is a square root. An example of a square root symbol would look like this. You usually see it look like this. Square root of 16 would be an example. Square root of 16, you want to look for two numbers that when multiplied together gives you 16. So that would be 4, or it could also be a negative 4, because negative 4 squared also gives you 16. Negative 4 times negative 4 also gives you the 16. The radicand is the expression under the radical sign. So the 16 is called your radicand, and this right here is your radical. Now, we talk about two different types of square roots. We talk about your principal square root and your negative square root. Your principal square root is the one that you're used to. It is the positive square root, and then we have the negative square root. Sometimes you want both. Sometimes you only want the positive, and sometimes you only want the negative. If you see the symbol plus, this right here means plus or minus, that's going to tell you that you want both. Otherwise, we just have the principal square root, which is your positive square root, and your negative square root, which is just your negative. On example 1, we need to simplify each expression. So we're going to simplify each of these square roots. The first one we're going to look at is the square root of 8. So we're going to put that into our calculator, and we're going to round that to the nearest tenth. So the square root of 8, if you put it in your calculator, you're going to get 2.8. So this one you get 2.8, and I only want the positive because it didn't ask for the negative. There wasn't a negative right in front of here, so I only wanted the positive. Letter B, I have plus or minus square root of 36. When we take the square root of that, we're going to get 6. And then there's a plus or minus in front of it, so we get plus or minus 6. Letter C, if you notice, there is a negative in front of that square root of 10, or a square root of 100, so we want only the negative answer. The square root of that is negative 10. So the square root of negative 100 is negative 10. Letter D, this is a fraction. Here's how we handle fractions. We separate them. So we get plus or minus and the square root of 9 on top over the square root of 16 on the bottom. So then we evaluate the top and the bottom here. The square root of 9 gives you 3. Square root of 16 gives you 4. And that is how we simplify a square root expression. You can use the square root button on your calculators. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is we're going to see if we can tell if a square root is rational or irrational. So remember when we were talking about irrational numbers, most of the time your irrational numbers ended up being your square root numbers. So let's look at each of these. Letter A is plus or minus square root of 81. Well, that means we want plus or minus, and then square root of 81 is 9. Plus or minus 9, that is not irrational because it's actually a whole number and an integer. So this one is rational. Okay, square root of 1.44, we can put that in our calculators, and we get 1.2. Now, because this is a terminating decimal, it's a decimal that ends, it is also rational. All right, letter C, we want the square root of 75. I'm going to take the square root of 75 on my calculator. Okay, what happens is we get a decimal that fills up the screen on your calculator. When that happens and there's no pattern to it, okay, if there's no pattern to it and it doesn't stop, that's when we call it irrational. So this one here is actually irrational because it filled up the screen on my calculator and there was no pattern to it, therefore it is irrational. All right, letter D, if you remember this one, we break down the top and the bottom separately. We get 2/3. And 2/3 is a rational number. And that's how you tell the difference between rational and irrational. And that's how you work with some square roots. Thank you for listening.